je vous présente le prochain conférencier. C'est aussi quelqu'un que j'adore. C'est une fierté de l'avoir avec nous depuis tant d'années. Il est chez Ubisoft depuis 2004. D'abord à la direction des services online jusqu'à la création de La Forge en 2016, qui est un labo de recherche appliquée. Et qu'il dirige depuis. Alors, si vous n'avez jamais eu l'occasion de l'entendre, vous allez le voir aujourd'hui. Il est super cool en plus. Je vous demande d'applaudir Yves Jacquier.
Bonjour tout le monde. Bon, j'ai la pression. So welcome everyone. My name is Yves Jacquier. I'm heading Ubisoft La Forge, which is Ubisoft R&D department indeed. So I'm really thrilled to talk about AI and generative AI because there's a lot of noise and a lot of hype about it. And my objective today is really to share the approach that we have taken at Ubisoft in a fast-pacing environment that only competes with both the level of excitement but also anxiety within creators' communities. So why are we talking about AI? Let's take a step back. Today, the content developed by Gen AI represents less than 5% in the video game industry, but according to game executives, it could reach up to 50% in the near future. It means that we're changing the value proposition paradigm from creation, production challenges to differentiation challenges. So how do we do that? First, let's bet on our people. We have talented teams of creators, and keeping them in control is at the core of the creative process, and that's necessary to ensure thoughtful design and also this unique touch of human creativity. Second, we have brands, and they are key differentiators in highly competitive markets. We also have tons of game assets that we can leverage to create AI models that really are true to our company's brand and identity, and more importantly, that no one else can replicate. And this technology is here to stay in the long run, right? We think it's important to develop internal capabilities, such as skills, upskilling, and knowledge on how to train generative AI models, the relevant models that are really true to our pipelines and our craft. This means defining methodologies, best practices, developing specific tools as well that can help to create quality data sets, provide transparency of the data used, and explainability of the models. Not only that's something that our artists are asking for, but it's also becoming a legal requirement in different countries, and especially in Europe. Finally, while creating our own models, we make sure it aligns with our company's values and with also, obviously, the expectations of our employees. Very concretely, when preparing the data and the caption of images in our data sets, for example, we try to be mindful of biases and stereotypes as not to reinforce them. ChatGPT took the world by storm in 2022, and it's been less than 3 years. Since then, we're flooded with conflicting communications, announcements, breakthroughs that generate as many opportunities than they raise questions. Time to talk about sustainable AI. The idea is fairly simple. For the last 3 years, there's been a mind-blowing acceleration in terms of model size, application, user-based. How do we make that growth sustainable? First, there's the dimension of hardware, and more specifically, the components, rare metals, and minerals that are in limited quantities, as well as geopolitical stakes. There's the question of ROI. developing and serving such models is crazy expensive, as we will see. Then there's the question of energy, as, for example, it has led Google to fall short on their climate footprint, as their emissions have climbed by 50% in 5 years due to the rise of AI. There's also the question of water, as data centers compete with other needs on this. What about the data? What happens once we've scrapped the internet twice, including the content generated by AI? And finally, even most importantly, we need to question ourselves on how to foster sustainable creativity. Let's start with hardware. Small equipments constitute the largest category of e-waste in terms of mass, accounting for 20 billion kilograms in 2022. Think about that, 20 billion kilograms. That's almost 1/3 of the total world's e-waste, and only a fraction is recycled. Gen AI waste is estimated to increase up to 5 billion. While production has more than doubled during the last decade, China remains a leader in rare metals with 70% of worldwide production, but also 87% of transformation. And as you can imagine, it also leads to a lot of geopolitical tensions. Let's talk now about money. Free services like Perplexity, ChatGPT, and else could let us forget that those services are crazy expensive. And the risk is to become dependent on a specific provider who will eventually need to monetize or disappear. First, AI services are way more expensive than their traditional counterpart. For example, search in Bard costs 10 times search in Google. We know that OpenAI is not profitable, despite having raised $20 billion since its founding. In 2023, an analyst estimated that the company was spending about 30 cents per query in ChatGPT. Today, a single query on the company's most advanced models costs more than $1,000, one query. Why? Because OpenAI used roughly 170 times more compute to get from 60% to 88% score on a standard test called RCAGI. The high-scoring version of O3 used more than $10,000 of resources to complete one test. About 4.6% of all the energy in the US goes toward data centers. And that figure has doubled since 2018. Meanwhile, carbon emissions from data centers in the US have tripled. In 2024, data centers were responsible for 2.2% of US emissions. What does that mean? Think about that. It's the same as the emissions of their domestic commercial airlines. In 2024, Environmental Sustainability Report of Microsoft has indicated a raise by 29% of CO2 emissions. More generally, the whole digital industry could represent between 70% to close to 6 times the 2050 GIEC targets for total CO2 emissions. And one of the reasons is that huge recent models consume a lot more energy per query, as much as 5 full tanks of gas for one query. More servers with more powerful GPUs do not only challenge power grids, but also water. Water is used to cool down servers. More data centers means greater water consumption for cooling. In 2030, in 5 years, the average European internet user is expected to consume 3 liters of water every day, which is equivalent to what this person should drink. What about AI's most important ingredients? Data. AI is trained on data. There are three elements in there. The dominant narrative in AI is that the more data, the better the model. But this data needs to be qualitative. The web is written by 52% in English. For the remaining 48%, 57% is poorly translated automatically. Think, for example, some description on Amazon website. It means that at some point, generative models will be trained on poorly generated material, which can lead to a degradation and even model collapse. On top of this, there's been some projection that we are running out of available data to train big LLMs. Agreeingly, new techniques like transfer learning or synthetic data could overcome that bottleneck. And third, elephant in the room. As most models have been built on copyrighted data, and there are many ongoing litigations on that front. So what can we do with that? First, as a user, we can do many things. We can wonder whether what we actually need, we can ask first to ask for more transparency. For example, at Ubisoft, we have evaluated the carbon footprint of our internal generative tools. The annual impact is about 720 kilograms of equivalent CO2. That's the equivalent of 5,000 kilometers of drive for all of our systems of generative AI for the whole company. So as such, we inform users to help them make educated choices and use the tools only when it creates real value. We also can wonder whether we actually need to use AI services or the latest hardware. Sometimes this is simply not the right solution to a problem. And sometimes specialized models are simply better. We can also define an energy budget and stick to it and make some choices. For example, specialized Gen AIs are consuming 30 times less energy than their generalist counterparts. A research on Google, Quant, or else consume 10 to 20 times less energy than the so-called deep research tools. We know that the dominant narrative about AI is throw more GPUs and more data. We can balance edge computing with cloud inference as content creators. And this is something we're working on at Ubisoft. Do the inference on the player's hardware to improve the experience while deporting the computing on this existing hardware. More specifically, at La Forge, we also balance local computing with cloud or server computing to train or fine-tune our own models. We can also be more frugal. We can leverage open source. We can adapt and fine-tune existing models. We also can be smart in engineering, as DeepSeek demonstrated when they released a model trained on GPUs that are 11 times less powerful than state-of-the-art. Dedicated focus tools are more efficient, meaning also less expensive to operate and use than big generalist models. Researchers have unveiled a new energy score on Hugging Face that helps make educated decisions. Be agnostic. We should pay attention to not create significant dependencies with third parties, whether from a technical or business standpoint. As content creators, we can also define an energy budget. As specialized models are consuming 30 times less energy than their generalist counterparts, we can provide focused models trained with efficient techniques. We should also develop a data strategy. For example, at Ubisoft, we have a department that is responsible to capture human data, like motion capture or head scans or voice. But we also ensure that we're doing that in a strategic, responsible, fair, and legal manner. Let's now talk about sustainable creativity. Some recent studies suggest that higher confidence and higher usage of GenAI increase cognitive offloading, thus diminishes critical thinking. And critical thinking is essential for us humans, but also as creators to produce meaningful and original content. So the question is not whether GenAI is overhyped or not. It definitely is. But it's also here to last. The question is how to implement that in a sustainable way in a fast-moving environment. And as such, we have, since the beginning, deployed a guiding principle at Ubisoft Scales, which is that we use AI to empower creators, not to automate creation. It might sound like nice and neat, would do great t-shirts, but it comes with many challenges, because we want to do that more than a motto. The first and most important challenge is in terms of people, because generative AI does not raise the bar. It raises the floor, meaning that it makes very accessible for anyone what a junior would do. So what about upskilling? How can we train seniors to these techniques? And how can we help juniors to develop while competing with those techniques? How do we help juniors grow in a world where seniority has been built on experienced hone on a scale of tasks that are now automated? How do we mentor them? How do we develop critical thinking? Not only this, but we also need to reinvent or at least adapt our recruitment processes, because at the era of GenAI, a portfolio or a technical test is not a reliable tool anymore. Second challenge is about the usage. AI is a moving target, and we need to set general principles and adapt. Beyond what's legal, and at least until a legal framework is defined, we must question ourselves about fair and sustainable usage. What are we aligned with? Legal frameworks tend to arrive late at tech parties, right? Regulations, for the moment, still fall behind a lot. In terms of IP, there's some litigation ongoing about the data that is used to train generative models. So how can we make sure that we always use AI in a transformative and thus creatively sustainable way? We also need to rethink our partnerships, both historical and new, as we don't want to produce vanilla content. We also need to reinvent them, like working with voice actors, but that in a hybrid way, which means, for example, leveraging technologies like text-to-speech, but that in a fair manner. Free popular services tend to make us forget that providing those services is crazy expensive. And related, let's not forget that beyond the tech demos that we're seeing every day, business models still need to be proven. Time to go concrete examples. Let's start with concept art, as it involves 2D artists. Image generation tools are powerful tools to generate ideas. For example, to iterate quickly and select the best ideas that will become concept art. By using GenAI, we raise the floor while keeping the artist in full control. How do we do this? Let's say that, as an artist, you need to generate many different ideas in a specific direction. You will first create or pick up some images, and those images will be used to serve a model. So here, we have an artist who picked up a sample of 30 images from the Raving Rabbids brand. And then, based on that, based on their decisions, they were able to create their own model to generate new Rabbids images. It can also be done on our other brands. And that's an example of the Assassin's Creed art direction. On the left, you have a capture of the game, while on the right, you have a piece of key art. Please keep in mind that the next example has been generated by researchers only for testing purpose. So let's say you want to create some new concepts to communicate your artistic vision. You can use popular models to generate ideas. And that's what vanilla models would give you. It's beautiful, no question, but not reflecting your vision as an artist. In other words, that's the model's style. Conversely, with our workflow, the artistic control comes from the artist, not from the model, and that's a result. Not perfect, but way closer of the look and feel of Assassin's Creed as defined by our creators. The same thing goes for our concept of characters. You need a high quantity of IDs, but within a style that, as an artist, you build, define, and refine. Where things got very interesting, that it can be applied to new contexts we have not explored yet. So that's the slide that my lawyers asked me to add. Full disclosure, the next example have been totally made up, not indicative at all of an incoming Ubisoft game. So imagine that you want to create an Assassin's Creed game in a medieval fantasy context. First, you need an open world with cities to explore. But also memorable sequences like fighting monsters in dark dungeons. The main character could be a demon assassin. And we think that our approach is more respectful of the artistic vision, as artists keep the control quite easily. So I've presented what we've done for image generation because it's a convenient 20-minute presentation. Obviously, the same concept applies to many other areas, whether technology is already mature or will in the near future. A glimpse now on what could come next for gaming. Implicit representation are a new mathematical way to represent and render 3D objects. You might have heard of Gaussian splatting or NeRFs, for example. There are new techniques arising in AI that allow to animate and control digital avatars, as you can see. It works for facial and any source can control an avatar in a very qualitative manner. So what could come next in the gaming industry? What could be the next disruption? Here's a hint. We might go from here to here. And yes, that's a hint on our research. But as it deals with designers, actors, likeness, and because it will be disruptive in the way we create and operate games, it's more important than ever that we stay true to our North Star. Let's use AI to empower creators and not to automate creation. Thank you very much.